My name is Beth Collier, and I am 32 years old. I have been a licensed electrician for 9 years. Not because I had no other options. I have a technical degree and a contractor's license that took me 4 years and more failed tests than I care to admit to earn. I chose this work because electricity doesn't lie to you. You wire it right, it works. You wire it wrong, you find out immediately. There is a brutal honesty to it that I have always respected. My hands are rough. I keep my hair short because long hair and live panels are a combination that ends careers. I drive a white work van with a magnetic sign on the side that says Collier Electric because 3 years ago I stopped working for other people and started working for myself. I have never once been embarrassed by any of it, until my sister made me feel like I should be. It was the third week of October when she called. I was in the middle of routing cable through a drop ceiling at a medical office remodel in Lakewood, had drywall dust in my hair, and a knee that was complaining about the concrete floor when my phone buzzed in my chest pocket. I saw her name, Abby, and climbed down to take it because she almost never calls in the middle of a workday. She started with small talk. "How are you doing? How's the van holding up? Did I see that it's supposed to rain all weekend?" I gave her short answers and waited. Abby only does small talk when she is working up to something she doesn't want to say. Finally, she said, "So Christmas this year." I said I was already planning on coming. I'd already cleared the week in my schedule. Mom's pot roast, Dad's terrible eggnog, the whole thing. There was a pause. The kind of pause that has been rehearsed. "So the thing is," she said, "Kyle wants to invite his whole family this year. His parents, his aunt and uncle from Scottsdale, and his brother Derek and his wife." Kyle was Abby's fiancé of 8 months. I liked him well enough. A little stiff, wore a lot of fleece vests, worked in commercial insurance, but he seemed to make Abby happy, and that had always been enough for me. "That sounds great," I said. "Big Christmas. Mom will love it." "Yeah." Another pause. "The thing is, Kyle's family is they're kind of formal. His dad was a federal judge. His mom does philanthropy. His aunt is some kind of department head at ASU. They're a little." She stopped herself and started again. "Kyle is worried that it might be awkward." "What might be awkward?" She didn't answer right away. "Abby, he just thinks," she said, and her voice went careful and quiet in a way that I recognized from childhood. The way she used to talk when she was about to say something she knew was wrong, but was going to say anyway. "He thinks that given the kind of people his family is, it might be a little uncomfortable if you came. He thinks it could create a weird dynamic." I stopped moving. I was standing next to my van in the parking lot and I just stopped. "A weird dynamic," I said. "He didn't say it mean. He's worried about what his dad will think. His dad is very old school about, careers and status and that kind of thing. And Kyle wants to make a good impression on his family because they've been kind of hard on him lately about." She stopped again. "He just thinks it would go smoother if it was a smaller thing this year. A smaller thing that doesn't include me." Silence. "Because of what I do for work." She didn't deny it. I stood in that parking lot for a long time after we hung up. A crow landed on the dumpster across the lot and stared at me like it was judging every decision I had ever made. I might have agreed with it in that moment. The part that sat heaviest was not what Kyle thought. Kyle barely knew me. I'd met him 4 times. The part that sat heaviest was that Abby had called to deliver the message. That she had heard it and thought, "Okay, I'll pass this along." That she had not called me first to say, "Kyle said something ridiculous," and I told him absolutely not. That she had waited and decided the right move was to ask me to absent myself from my own family's Christmas because her fiancé was worried about optics. I thought about telling her that. I thought about telling her a lot of things. Instead, I said, "I understand." And I meant something different by it than she thought I did. What my family didn't know, what nobody knew yet, was that 6 weeks earlier, I had won a commercial contract for a hotel renovation project downtown. Not just any contract. A phased electrical overhaul across a 14-story property being converted from office space to a boutique hotel. The kind of job that gets you written up in the local trade association newsletter. The kind that required me to bring on 2 subcontractors and a project coordinator. The total contract value was just under $800,000. The deposit alone had cleared more money through my business account in a single week than I had made in my first 2 years as a journeyman combined. I had been waiting to tell my family in person at Christmas. It was the kind of news that deserved a table, a meal, people you love looking you in the face when you say it. But they had taken that moment from me, so I decided to let them have their Christmas. I wanted to see what 3 days would teach them. I spent Christmas Eve alone, which sounds like the saddest sentence I have ever written, but was actually the most peaceful evening I'd had in months. My best friend Tamara had invited me to her place in Aurora. Her husband makes tamales from scratch every Christmas Eve, and her kids are loud and wonderful, and I love them, but I needed the quiet more than I needed the company. I made myself a proper dinner. Roast chicken, roasted potatoes with rosemary, a bottle of red wine I'd been saving since September. I watched a documentary about the construction of the Hoover Dam and felt, for the first time in weeks, completely like myself. I did not spend Christmas Eve feeling sorry for myself. I spent it being very deliberate about what I was building. What I didn't know was what was happening 12 miles away at my parents' house while I sat in my own kitchen being deliberate. Kyle's family had arrived that morning. His father, the retired federal judge, was a tall man named George who had strong handshake energy and opinions about everything. His mother, Patricia, and yes, I know that name now, I've heard it repeated to me many times since, was polished and cool and asked a lot of questions about real estate values. Kyle's aunt and uncle from Scottsdale were pleasant enough, but spoke mostly to each other. And Kyle's brother Derek had come with his wife, a woman named Melissa, who, according to my mother's later, stumbling, apologetic account of the evening, was the one who changed everything. Melissa, it turned out, had grown up in Pittsburgh in a family of union tradespeople. Her father had been a master plumber for 30 years. Her older brother was a general contractor who now ran a firm with 15 employees. She had spent her childhood watching her dad leave before dawn and come home smelling like pipe solder and honest work, and she had enormous respect for it in the way that people do when they have watched it up close for their entire lives. At dinner, my mother, who later described this as the moment she realized she had made a catastrophic error in judgment, mentioned offhandedly that one of her daughters wasn't able to make it this year. Melissa asked why not. My mother, caught off guard, gave a vague answer about scheduling. Kyle's father, George, who apparently had the conversational instincts of a federal prosecutor, asked what the daughter did for work. Kyle said she was an electrician. His father made a sound that my mother described as not unkind but distinctly dismissive, the sound of a man who has filed the information away in a category he doesn't spend much time thinking about. And then Melissa put her fork down. She asked Kyle directly why his fiancé's sister hadn't come to Christmas. Kyle said it was complicated. Melissa said she'd like to understand the complication. The table had gone quiet by then. My mother said you could hear the fireplace crackling. Kyle said something about it just being easier, given the difference in backgrounds, for everyone to be comfortable. Melissa looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Derek, her husband, Kyle's brother, and something passed between them that my mother couldn't fully decode, but that she described as the look you give someone when you realize a problem is bigger than you thought. Melissa said very calmly that she wasn't sure what backgrounds had to do with Christmas dinner, and that in her family, the people who worked with their hands were the people who built everything everyone else was standing in. She said her father had wired 3 hospitals over the course of his career. She said she would have genuinely loved to meet Kyle's future sister-in-law, and that it was a shame she wasn't there. Kyle tried to explain. He said it wasn't personal. It was just that his family tended toward professional careers, and he hadn't wanted anyone to feel out of place. Melissa said, who exactly would have felt out of place? Nobody answered her. His father, George, the federal judge, said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at Kyle and said, your instincts here were poor, son. That was all he said. But from a man of his particular bearing, according to my mother, it landed like a verdict. The dinner continued, but the temperature never recovered. Abby, by my mother's account, spent the second half of the meal looking at the tablecloth. 3 days later, on the morning of the 28th, there was a knock at my door. I was still in my work clothes. I had driven out that morning to check on a punch list item at a residential job in Jefferson Park, because standing still had never been something I did well, and when I opened the door, I found my mother, my father Abby, and Kyle standing on my front step in the cold. My mother looked like she had been holding herself together with sheer force of will for about 72 hours. My father looked the way he always looks when he is walking into a situation he didn't create, but is going to have to help resolve. Abby looked like she hadn't slept. Kyle looked like a man who had spent 3 days arguing with himself and arriving, repeatedly, at the same uncomfortable conclusion. I let them in because I was not raised to leave people on a doorstep in December. I made coffee because I was not raised to let guests stand in my kitchen without offering something hot to drink. Even guests who had recently treated my profession as a social liability. My mother started talking. She explained about Melissa, about the dinner, about Kyle's father. She talked fast, the way she does when she's trying to cover a lot of ground before her composure gives out. When she got to the part about Kyle's father saying his instincts were poor, she stopped and looked at her hands. Kyle said, "I heard about the contract." I waited. Tamara posted about it. Tagged your business page, the hotel project. I let the silence sit for a moment. 800,000, he said, and his voice had a quality to it that I recognized. It was the voice of someone who has just done math they wish they hadn't. 782, I said. Before the change order on the mechanical room, which brought it to just over 810. Nobody said anything for a long time. My father cleared his throat. He said he was proud of me. I thanked him and told him calmly that it would have been good to hear that at Christmas. He nodded once and didn't look away from me when I said it. That mattered. My mother started crying. I handed her a dish towel because I was out of paper towels, and I let her cry because some things need to move through you before they can settle. I have always believed that. Abby apologized. It was not a simple apology. She tried to explain why she had done it, what she had been thinking, how much pressure she had felt to make Kyle's family comfortable, and I understood all of it. Understanding it did not make it hurt less, but it made it make sense. I told her that. I also told her that the next time someone asked her to exclude me from something on the grounds of what I did for a living, I expected her to say no. She said she would. I believed her. Kyle apologized too. His was shorter and less detailed than Abby's, which actually made it more convincing. He said he had been wrong and that he had underestimated me badly. He did not try to explain his reasoning at length, which I respected. I accepted it. Not because it erased anything, but because carrying that kind of thing is weight I don't need, and I already do enough heavy work. What nobody said out loud, but everyone in my kitchen understood, was this. The thing Kyle had tried to hide had become the exact thing that defined how his own family saw him. He had excluded me to protect an image, and it had cost him his father's respect, his brother's goodwill, and the approval of a woman who could have been an ally. He had tried to make me invisible, and instead made himself smaller. The thing about electrical work is that everything is connected. You cannot hide a bad splice forever. Eventually the current finds it. A week after the new year, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Melissa, Derek's wife. She said she hoped I didn't mind that she'd gotten my number from my mother. She said she had been thinking about me since Christmas and had wanted to reach out. We talked for an hour. She told me about her father, about growing up in a house where the work schedule ran on union shifts and every vacation had to be scheduled around a project timeline. I told her about the first time I ran a job solo and how the building inspector had been openly skeptical of me for about 20 minutes before I walked him through my panel diagram and watched the skepticism leave his face. She laughed and said she knew that exact moment. The moment when the skepticism leaves. We made plans to meet in person the following week. Melissa's brother, it turned out, was currently bidding on a mixed-use development project in the Rhino neighborhood. A big one. The electrical scope of work alone was going to require a specialist. She asked if I would be open to a conversation with him. I said I would. That conversation happened in February. 3 weeks later, I was in contract negotiations for a scope of work that would run 16 months and involve more square footage than anything I had ever touched. The project was not guaranteed. Nothing in this industry ever is. But the door had opened. The door had opened because Kyle had tried to close one. He had been so certain my work was a liability, that my van and my license and my steel-toed boots were something to be managed and minimized and hidden from the people whose respect he wanted. He had built a version of his family that had no room for me in it, and in doing so he had revealed exactly what he was to the people he was trying to impress. I am still an electrician. I still drive the white van with the magnetic sign. I still come home at the end of a long day with sore knees and a satisfaction that I have never been able to adequately explain to people who have never built anything with their hands. The feeling of standing in a finished building and knowing where every circuit runs because you put it there yourself. The particular quiet pride of that. Abby and Kyle are still together. She sent me photos last month of the venue they put a deposit on. It's a beautiful space. Vaulted ceilings, exposed beams, big windows. I looked at the photos and thought about the electrical panel that must be running behind that south wall. Occupancy lighting like that requires serious amperage. I thought about the electrician who had wired it, and I hoped they had been paid what they were worth. I have not been excluded from anything since December. And I have learned, in the months since, that the people who try to make you smaller almost always hand you exactly what you needed without ever meaning to. They open doors they thought they were closing. They make introductions they thought they were preventing. They build the very room they were trying to keep you out of. My boots are still steel-toed, my hands are still rough. And somewhere in Rhino, there is a building going up that is going to need a lot of wire. I intend to be the one who runs it.